Chapter 5. From the Memoirs of Rogi and Don. I was not to experience another manifestation of the family ghost for nearly 16 years. That first encounter in the twilit woods took on a dreamlike aspect. It might have been forgotten, I suppose, had not the memory been rekindled every time I smelled raspberry or the distinctive pungency of bear scats. But I did not brood on it. Truth to tell, I had more important matters to occupy me, my own developing metafunctions and those of my brother. I have already mentioned that Don and I were fraternal twins, no more closely related than any Singleton brothers. Many years later, Dennis told me that if we had both hatched from a single egg, our brains might have been consonant enough to have attained harmonious mental intercourse, instead of the clouded and antagonistic relationship that ultimately prevailed between us. As it was, we were of very different temperaments. Don was always more outgoing and aggressive, while I was introspective. In adulthood, we were both tormented by the psychological chasm separating us from normal humanity. I learned to live with it, but Don could not. In this, we were like many other natural operants who came after us, our successes and tragedies blending into the ongoing evolutionary trend of the planetary mind, studied so dispassionately by the scientists of the galactic milieu. In our early childhood, following that initial stress-provoked incident of fast speech and fast sight out in the woods, we experienced other near-involuntary telepathic interchanges. Once, Don scalded himself with hot soup, and I, in the next room, jumped up screaming. I would have a furious argument with a cousin, and Don would come running up, knowing exactly what the fight was about. We sometimes dreamed the same dreams and shared unspoken jokes. Eventually, we attained crude telepathic communication, as well as a kind of shared farsight and mutual sensitivity. We experimented calling to each other over greater and greater distances and exercised our farsight with variations on games such as hide-and-seek and hide the thimble. Our cousins were blasé about our talents, ascribing them to the acknowledged freakishness of twins. They learned early not to play card games with us and casually utilized our far-sensing abilities to track down lost items and anticipate impending adult interference in illicit activities. We were a little weird, but we were useful. No big thing. On one of our first days at school, I was cornered by a bully and commanded to hand over my milk money or suffer a beating. I broadcast a mental cry for help. Don came racing into the schoolyard alcove where I'd been trapped, radiating coercive fury and saying not a single word. The bully, nearly twice Don's size, fled. My brother and I stood close together until the bell rang, bonded in fraternal love. This would happen often while we were young, when each of us was the other's best friend. It became rarer as we approached adolescence, and ended altogether after we reached puberty. By the time we were 9, the age, Dennis later explained to me, when the brain attains its adult size and the metafunctions tend to solidify, resisting further expansion unless painful education techniques stimulate them artificially, Don and I had become fairly adept in what is now called fast speech on the intimate mode. We could communicate across distances of 2 or 3 kilometers, sharing a wide range of nuance and emotional content. Our fast-scanning ability was weaker, requiring intense concentration in the transmission of any but the simplest images. By mutual agreement, we never told anyone explicit details of our telepathic talent, and we became increasingly wary of demonstrating metapsychic tricks to our cousins. Like all children, we wanted to be thought normal. Nevertheless, there was a good deal of fun to be had using the powers, and we couldn't resist playing with them surreptitiously, in spite of vague notions that such mind games might be dangerous. In the lower grades of grammar school, we drove the good sisters crazy as we traded far-spoken wisecracks and then snickered enigmatically out loud. We sometimes recited in eerie unison or antiphonally. We traded answers to test questions until we were placed in separate classrooms, and even then we still managed to cooperate in uncanny, disruptive pranks. We were tagged fairly easily as troublemakers and were easily bored and inattentive. To our contemporaries, we were just the crazy twins, ready to do the outrageous to attract attention. Just as in our baby years we had vied to attract the notice of hard-working, hard-drinking Oncle Louis and the kind but distracted Tante Lorraine. But our foster parents had 3 additional children of their own after our arrival, for a total of 9, and we were lost in the crowd of cousins. As we grew older, we developed a small repertoire of other metafaculties. I was the first to learn how to raise a mental wall to keep my inmost thoughts private from Don, and I was always better at weaving mind screens than he. It provoked his anger when I retreated into my private shell, and he would exercise his coercive power in almost frantic attempts to break me down. His mental assaults on me were at first without malice. It was rather as if he were afraid to be left alone. When I finally learned to block him out completely, he sulked, then revealed that he was genuinely hurt. I had to promise that I would let him back into my mind if he really needed me. When I promised, he seemed to forget the whole matter. Don amused himself by attempting to coerce others, a game I instinctively abhorred and rarely attempted. He had some small success, especially with persons who were distracted. Poor Tante Lorraine was an easy mark for gifts of kitchen goodies while she was cooking, for example, but it was next to impossible to coerce the redoubtable nuns who were our teachers. Both of us experimented in trying to read the minds of others. Don had little luck, except in the perception of generalized emotions. I was more skilled in probing, and occasionally picked up skeins of subliminal thought, those talking to oneself mumblings that form the superficial layer of consciousness. But I was never able to read the deeper thoughts of any person but my twin brother, a limitation I eventually learned to thank God for. We developed a modest self-redaction that enabled us to speed the healing of our smaller wounds, bruises, and blisters. Curing germ-based illness, however, even the common cold, was beyond us. We also practiced psychokinesis and learned to move small objects by mind power alone. I remember how we looted coin telephones throughout 2 glorious summer weeks, squandering the money on ice cream, pop, and bootleg cigarettes. Then, because we were still good Catholic Franco-American boys at heart, we had qualms of conscience. In confession, Father Racine gave us the dismal news that stealing from New England Belle, we didn't reveal our modus operandi, was just as much of a sin as stealing from real human beings. Any notions we might have had of becoming metapsychic master thieves died a-borning. Perhaps because of our upbringing, perhaps because of our lack of criminal imagination, we were never tempted along those lines again. Our fatal flaws lay in other directions. The first indications of them came when we were 10 years old. It was late on a dreary winter day. School was over and Don and I were fooling around in what we thought was an empty school gym, making a basketball perform impossible tricks. An older boy named O'Shaughnessy, newly come to the school from a tougher neighborhood in Boston, happened to come along and spot us working our psychokinetic magic. He didn't know what he was seeing, but he decided it must be something big and sauntered out to confront us. "You two," he said in a harsh, wheedling voice, "have got a secret gimmick, and I want in on it." Comment? Qu'est-ce que c'est?" we babbled, backing away. I had the basketball. "Don't give me that frog talk. I know you speak English." He grabbed Don by the jersey. "I been watching, and I seen you gimmick the ball, make it stop in mid-air and dribble all over your bodies and go into the hoop in crazy ways. What you got, radio control?" "No, hey, let go!" Don struggled in the big kid's grip, and O'Shaughnessy struck him a savage, sharp-knuckled blow in the face that made my own nerves cringe. Both of us yelled. "Shut up!" hissed O'Shaughnessy, his right hand still clenched Don's shirt. The left, grubby and broken-nailed, seized Don's nose in some terrible Street Fighter grip with 2 fingers thrust up the nostrils and the thumbnail dug into the bridge. Don sucked in a ragged, agonized breath through his mouth, but before he could utter another sound, the brute said, "Not a squeak, cocksucker, and your brother better hold off if he knows what's good for both of you." The fingers jammed deeper into Don's nose. I experienced a hideous burst of sympathetic pain. I push just a little harder. See? I could pop out his eyeballs. "Hey, punk, you want to see your brother's eyeballs rolling on the gym floor, where I could step on 'em?" Queasily, I shook my head. "Right." O'Shaughnessy relaxed a little. "Now you just calm down and do a repeat of that cute trick I saw you doing when I came in. The in and outer long bomb." My mind cried out to my brother, Donnie, what gonna do?" Trick, do it, God's sake!" "Then he'll know." O'Shaughnessy growled, "You stalling?" He dug in. I felt pain and nausea, and the peripheral area of the gym had become a dark red fog. "Don't hurt him, I'll do it." Trembling, I held the ball between my hands and faced the basket at the opposite end of the court. It was a full 60 feet away, more than 18 meters. I made a gentle toss. The ball soared in a great arc, as though it were jet-propelled, and dropped into the distant basket. When it hit the floor, it bounced mightily, came up through the hoop from beneath, and neatly returned to my waiting hands. "Jeez!" said O'Shaughnessy. "Radio control, I knew it! Thing's a gold mine!" Raw greed glared out of his eyes. "All right, punk, hand over the ball and the gimmick." "Gimmick?" I repeated stupidly. "The thing!" he raged. "The thing that controls the ball! Dumb little fat-faced frog! Don't you know a ball control gimmick like that's got to be worth a fortune? Get me out of this backwoods hole and back to Beantown and to my Uncle Dan and... Never mind! Hand it over!" "Let my brother go first," I pleaded. The big kid laughed. He crooked one leg around Don's ankle and simultaneously pushed. My brother sprawled helplessly on the floor, gagging and groaning. O'Shaughnessy advanced on me with hands outstretched. 2 of his fingers were bloody. "The ball and the gimmick," he demanded, "or it's your turn, punk." "The only gimmick's inside my head," I said, "but you can have the ball." I drove the rubber sphere at him with all my psychokinetic strength, hitting him full in his grinning face. His nose shattered with the impact, and the ball burst its bladder. I heard a gargling scream from O'Shaughnessy, and a throaty noise, like a Malamute snarl from somebody else. "Help me get him, Donnie." The torn and flattened ball like some writhing marine organism clamping itself across a horror-stricken face, savage sounds and big hands clawing and punching at me. The brother mind poured out its own PK simultaneously to meld with mine, strength magnified manyfold, cemented with mutual loathing, fear and creative solidarity. Somebody shrieking as the 3 of us struggled beneath the basket. Then a grotesque figure, like a scarecrow, its head a red-smeared, dented globe. "Go for it, Donnie, man! Hey, together now! Allez, slam dunk the bastard!" They found O'Shaughnessy, bloody-nosed and half out of his mind with terror, stuffed headfirst into the basket, so that the hoop imprisoned his upper arms. The broken basketball encased his head and muffled his cries a little, but he was never in any real danger of suffocating. We had been caught, literally red-handed, trying to sneak out of the gymnasium. O'Shaughnessy blamed us, of course, and told the story pretty much as it had happened, leaving out his own extortion attempt and assault with intent to maim. He also accused us of owning a mysterious electronic device that the FBI'd be real interested in hearing about. His tale was too outlandish to be credited, even against us, the crazy twins. We maintained that we'd found him in his weird predicament and attempted to help. Since we were obviously both too small to have boosted a hulking lout 3 meters above floor level, it was evident that O'Shaughnessy had lied. His reputation was even more dubious than ours. He was a bad hat who'd been shipped off to relatives in the New Hampshire boondocks in the vain attempt of keeping him out of a Boston reformatory. Following the incident with us, he was retransported with alacrity and never heard from again. We, on the other hand, were clearly not telling all we knew. Many questions were asked, odd bits of circumstantial evidence were noted and pondered. In the midst of the uproar, we remained tight as quail clams. Our cousins who knew, or could deduce, a thing or two, rallied around loyally. The family came first, especially against the Irish salopery. After some weeks, the incident was forgotten. But Don and I didn't forget. We hashed over and over the glorious experience of a meta-concert, the two minds working as one, that had produced an action greater than the sum of its parts, giving us transcendent power over a hated enemy. We tried to figure out how we had done it. We knew if we could produce the effect at will, we would never have to be afraid of anyone again. We thought about nothing else, and our schoolwork was totally neglected, but we were never able to mesh our minds that way again, no matter how hard we tried. Some of the fault lay in our imperfect metapsychic development, but the greater failure was grounded in a mutual lack of trust. Our peril at O'Shaughnessy's hands had been sufficient to cancel our jealous individuality, but once the danger was lifted, we reverted to our deeper mindsets. Don, the driven, domineering coercer, and I, the one who thought too much, whose imagination even at that young age whispered where the abuse of power might lead. Each of us blamed the other for the meta-concert failure. We ended up locking each other out in a fury of disappointment, thwarted ambition and fear, and we barely missed flunking the 5th grade. Unc Louis called us to him on a certain spring evening and displayed the fatal report cards. Our cousins were all outside, playing in the warm dusk. We heard their laughter and shrieks as they played Red Rover in a vacant lot while we stood sulkily before our uncle and faced the time of reckoning. "Haven't I done my best to rear you properly? Aren't you as dear to me as any of my own children?" He brandished the cards, and his beer-tinged breath washed over us. "A few failing grades one could understand, but this? The sisters say you must make up these failed subjects or repeat a year. All summer long you must go to public school in the morning. What a disgrace! Such a thing has never happened before in this family. You shame the Remoulades." We mumbled something about being sorry. "Oh, my boys," he said sorrowfully, "what would your poor parents say? Think of them, watching from heaven so disappointed. It's not as though you were blockheads who could do no better. You have good brains, both of you. To waste them is an insult to the good God who made you." We began to sniffle. "You will do better?" "Yes, Uncle Louis." "Born." He heaved a great sigh, turned away from us, and went to the sideboard where he kept the whiskey. "Now go out and play for a while before bedtime." As we fled onto the front porch, we heard the clink of glassware. "Now he can get Stinko in peace," Don hissed bitterly. "Rotten old drunk. Never expect him to understand. He talks about us being a disgrace." We sat together on the bottom step, putting aside our enmity. It was quite dark. The other kids were dodging around under the streetlights. We had no wish to join them. I said, "Plenty of people flunk. He didn't have to drag Papa and Maman into it, or God." "God!" Don made the word a curse. "When you come right down to it, the whole darn mess is his fault." Horrified at the sacrilege, I could only gape at him. He was whispering, but his mental voice seemed to shout inside my skull. "God made us, didn't he? Okay, our parents made our bodies, but didn't he make our souls? Isn't that what the nuns say? And what's a soul anyway, Rogi? A mind?" "Well, yes, but God made these weird minds of ours, so it's his fault we have all this trouble. How can we help it?" "Gee, I don't know, I began doubtfully. He grabbed me by the shoulders. The voices of the kids mingled with crickets and traffic noises and the sound of a television program that Aunt Gluey had turned on inside. "Didn't you ever stop to think about it, dummy?" Don asked me. "Why are we like this? Why aren't there any other people in the world like us? When God made us, what the hell did he think he was doing?" "What kind of dumb question is that? That's the dumbest thing you've ever said. It's probably become some kind of sin even. You better shut your stupid trap, Donny." He started to laugh then, a smothered, squeaky sound loaded with an awful triumph, and he mind-screamed at me. "He did! It's not our fault! We didn't ask for this! He can't blame us! Nobody can! Hell with all of them! Hell! Hell!" I closed my mind to him, slamming the barrier into place as though I were locking the door of a cellar that threatened to spew out black nightmares. And then he began to snivel and beg me to open up to him again. But I got up from the steps and went back into the house, into the kitchen where Tante Lorraine was baking something and the lights were bright, and I sat at the table and pretended to do my homework.